Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of ClueCon Weekly. I am your host, Jon Gray, and today we're going to talk about one of the most controversial topics that we have had on this podcast, at least in recent time, vibe coding, and specifically what happens when you let AI code alongside your team at kind of like an enterprise scale. So to talk about this topic, Wesley Fuchter, Senior Principal Software at Modus Create. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, definitely. So, Wesley, to kind of kick this off, can you give us a snapshot of yourself and what you do over at Modus Create?
Yes, sure. So I'm Wesley. I'm a software engineer at Modus Create. I have been working there for 7 years now, and I have around 15 years career. I work primarily with research and development at Modus Create. Have done some different things there. Modus is a consulting company that helps clients with digital transformation and to navigate on this new AR era as well. And primarily what I have been doing is experimenting a lot of these new tools, especially around developer experience in the last year, to really understand how we can take leverage of, in a professional way, of agentic coding.
No, that's super neat, and obviously something that needs a lot of research and a lot of development into. So, when you were kind of digging into this idea of wanting to tap into vibe coding or agentic code generation, kind of letting your developers play with that, why did you kind of decide to run that experiment, and what was kind of like your hypothesis, and how did you go about that?
Yeah, took a few months. It was the whole experiment took around 6 months. The part that we really we really talked about, like in the content I have been producing, is the latest 3 months, but I started a bit earlier. So when I went back from summer vacation, I live in Brazil, so we are in the south of the world, right? So summer vacation for me was between December and January. I was without any projects. I needed to pick something new to start working on, and I had many people talking about codings like GitHub Copilot, Cursor, Windsurf, those different tools, right? Back in the day, it was around the first week of January. The vibe coding term didn't exist, so it was even before the vibe coding term that was invented around February, right?
Yeah.
So I had a perception, a feeling that those tools will or would, in that moment, help a lot in getting productivity, in getting us faster results, right? So we develop software as on demand, right, as a consulting business. So it is important to us to deliver better results with less resources. That's something that is important to the business.
Definitely.
So I started experimenting myself, like literally with, hey, let me take a look on what I can learn from using Cursor in the next 3 hours. That was like the very first day. And it was amazing the fact that I could prompt, and instead of waiting or working around a couple hours, I could wait a couple seconds and see like a bunch of code generated for me to do something. Was that code good? Was that code functional? I don't know, right? And that was not important at that particular time for me. Yeah. I just wanted to see how that was working. So I started working a lot, experimenting, and then talking to my bosses, to my peers at the company, right? Trying to explain what I was doing and why. And we had a conversation, and then we decided to take a step further on putting together around 20 people in a project. So it was around 20 people, but essentially 5 developers, 6 with me, but I was not really developer at the experiment, where we would have 3 developers working in building an app without using AI, using the old style coding, and 2 developers in the other side building the same application without using AI, without any coding. They were required to do generation with AI, prompting all the time. And if they needed to code for any reason, they would need to document that and why that happened.
Yeah.
So, and in order to do a good experiment, and something that I try to do every time I'm doing experiments, you need to really understand what is the learnings that you are aiming there, right? You can fail. That's why you have an experiment, right? You can fail. It might not work, but you need to think exactly what is the target there. So for us, the target was, can we do faster in terms of the time that will take to build the application, around 50%. So that was a bold number that we wanted there. Can we do the coding without being an expert on that particular language?
Yeah.
That's why we choose a backend Python engineer to do full stack with TypeScript. He never worked with TypeScript before, so that was also an important thing. And will be the quality will be the same, at least the same. I'm not looking for better quality, but I want a set worse quality, right? So those are the three hypotheses we had in order to execute the experiment.
Yeah.
And then we picked the tool. I validated a bunch of tools before the experiment, between Cursor, V0 by Vercel, Bo.Neo, those different tools. But I really wanted a professional developer experience, a IDE, right? Back then, we decided to go with Cursor because in that particular moment, GitHub Copilot didn't have the agent feature that we were looking for.
Yeah. No, that Cursor agent, when that released, I'm just thinking about how crazy it would be to go on vacation and then come back and then realize the entire world had then just adopted this new way of generating code, and you're like, all right, yeah, let's dive in and dig into it.
Yeah.
But what I think is really interesting is that we've had people on both sides sitting in the virtual chair that you're sitting in right now. Some that absolutely love this new revolution, some who don't, and we never really saw a scientific method approach to kind of creating and doing this in order to kind of test and balance those out. And you were mentioning some of the metrics and like markers in order to gauge the how reliable or how good either option was. What were some more of those metrics, or like what were some of the takeaways that you were able to find between those?
So in terms of data for the experiment, I had three things, right? We can say four. So one thing was the time. So I wanted to measure how fast we could go with AI, or how slow, depending if that would be slow, right?
Yeah.
Could be slow. So both teams, they were required to input timesheets, like plain timesheets, regular timesheets. But to the detail level I required them to add, were like to the ticket in Jira. So if they were working on adding a button to a page, both teams would have the same ticket on their backlogs, cloned, right? We would clone tickets between backlogs, and they would do the same task, the same acceptance criteria, and they would go to the timesheet and add to that particular ticket took me 1 hour with AI, 2 hours without AI. So by measuring to that level of detail, I was able to measure that we went around 40% faster. The AI team, which was one person less, 30% less resources, human resources, they would be 40% faster to that comparison to the ticket level in average for all the features of the application.
Very neat.
So yeah, they complain about me when I was not in the calls, because I was very strict about that. I requested them to add documentation to write anything that they would learn, especially the AI team, any site, any reason they needed to code manually or without generating the code, anything they would need to add to a document. And we use that document to produce the experiment report later. In terms of evaluating the quality, we run SonarQube on both code bases. We had that in our pipelines, right? So as many projects I have, we validated that both projects generated a very similar amount of bugs, a very similar amount of issues, very similar amount of vulnerabilities, code vulnerabilities. So to almost the same amount of lines of code. So it was not, of course, a perfect number, but I couldn't see a huge difference either to better or worse in terms of code quality by running the static analysis there. And I also had a code review done by another external person, within our team, a very senior architect that was reviewing the code bases, and he was not told which code base was AI generated without or not AI generated. So in that situation, he will need to validate the code without the bias, or AI with or no AI, and to give me a honest feedback about do you think that this AI code base or this is the AI code base, and do you think this code base is worse than the other code base? And we could see very similar outputs of both code bases. So those are the metrics you use to produce the reports.
Very neat. Were there anything that was kind of shocking or opposite of what you thought, or going into it, is that kind of what you would have expected to come?
I think there is one thing that was so I started the experiment with this backend Python engineer, right?
Yeah.
So I asked him to do TypeScript, and he never done that. So it was good to see that within a couple of days, he was able to produce screens. He would be able to write, APIs, basic code, basic TypeScript code, but he was writing TypeScript code. So I tried to push him further on asking him to make decisions around the overall architecture of the application on Amazon Web Services. So in that moment, before I asked him to do that, he proved to me that AI was helping him to be productive with a new technology he was not aware before that. But when I asked him to make decisions over, a basic decision, should I use an API gateway or a application load balancer? When he was required to do that task, he took more time than usually he would take, and more time than the non-AI developer that was experienced on using Amazon and some around the box. That proved to me that AI can help you to generate code in a language that you don't know, but as long as you know basics of logic and basics of language, they're not that different, right? You are able to be productive while reviewing and asserting the quality of the code you are generating. But when you're asked to make decisions on things that you are not an expert on, or you are not a well-versed on that particular function or the role within a software development project, right? AI can give you details. AI can give you different points of view. If you are going to ChatGPT and making a discussion or brainstorming, you can do that, right? But making the right call and being sure why you're making that decision, that was not something that AI could help a lot.
No, that's really interesting, because I am very guilty of sending a task to one of the LLMs and getting a response back, and next thing I know, I'm like, this is taking me an hour of me just babysitting the LLM instead of just actually doing my homework. Reminds me of like in school when you just like cheat on your math tests rather than just learning how to do it. Would have been way easier in the first place. So that is interesting. I like the way that you phrase that about the certain times where if you know what you are talking about and doing, then there is a benefit in kind of doing it yourself. But in order to just get a big influx of information in the beginning, then that's really where it shines. But I'm really glad that you brought up kind of the perspective of the developers, because I like to think that AI doesn't like replace developers, but it can replace the worst parts of their day. So I'm curious, from their perspective, what was their kind of feedback, minus all the notes and the detailed logging that they had to do for you? Do they kind of like these tools? Are the headaches being kind of replaced by the optimism of some of these tools that you're allowing them to kind of use?
So in particular, there was a developer that when I presented to him the challenge of delivering the application 50% faster by using AI, he had some experience with the basics of the GitHub Copilot. The first GitHub Copilot version that would, just generate a couple files, not the agentic experience, right? So that his experience with agentic development was very limited. And that was fine, because I really wanted new people to learn, right? And the whole company was, new to that. So when I presented him in the first call, in our first 30 minutes call, I presented the idea and the hypothesis. He was, no, that's not going to be possible, right? We're not going to be able to do that. He was very skeptical about that, right? After 2 weeks working in the experiment, he was making suggestions and improvements of his own workflows.
Mm-hmm.
So that proves that it is something that I don't want to use the word force, but let me give you maybe a better word, but somehow you need to push people to experiment sometimes because they are not going to do them by themselves.
Definitely.
There are people that are like that, and I mean, that's fine. It's not a complaint. But when you believe in something, and I really believed on that, I pushed him to do that, and he trusted on me. And then after a couple of weeks, he was pretty happy about those new learnings. He was feeling good about that. He was feeling good about the learnings and how we were doing that. At the same time, and that's something that I can talk about myself as well. I like coding. I like solving the problem. I like, putting my hands and typing stuff. And we all do. Most of the people that code, they kind of love it because otherwise you wouldn't do that job. You would do something else. Yeah. So, but I mean, for business, like for a professional software development, we are not playing around. We are working and we need to deliver results, and we need more results with less resources, everything, the word is an ass and all those things, right? So I personally like coding, but I am not going to code as much as before while using agentic coding.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I'm talking about myself, right? I need to find a way to be happy and to be, and to survive on this new
world. No, and in a industry where we are kind of just told that our code doesn't compile and we get errors and we get red flashing lights and nothing usually works until it finally Eureka does, it is a very daunting kind of experience. And that's why, even though when Claude Code is like, oh, you're absolutely right, and they're lying to you, or they're very confident and optimistic about it, I like to deem on a little bit of light that is there. But on a point that you mentioned where one of your team members was adopting some of these tools, what tools were they using? And do you have preferences on when to use different stuff? And I kind of asked this in the context of I use 3 or 4 different AI tools depending on the certain scenario. And that's kind of because, a new feature rolls in here, or maybe I realize that I've been misusing something else, or I'm just loving to download stuff on my computer. So what kind of tools are you guys using, and how do you solve the problem of having so many tools kind of poking all over the place? Or is that the way to go?
Yeah. So to answer that, let me give you a couple details first. Okay, so we are recording this in November, right? So 11 months after I started this whole thing at Modus Create. The very first day was around 6th of January. So when we started doing that, many of the tools we have today either didn't exist or they were different. Mm-hmm. So that's something we need to keep. A whole year in AI era is like a century. So everything's changing so fast.
Exactly.
So the two I had available, I had Bow.new, V0 by Vercel, and Cursor. Those are the 3 tools I started using. I quickly not because I don't like Vercel, V0 Vercel or Bow.new. I quickly, avoided using them because I wanted the developer experience. I didn't want a screen with a prompt and everything would happen. Mm-hmm. I wanted a IDE experience where I could be close to the code at the same time leveraging agentic coding.
Yeah.
So Cursor was the best we had in that moment. So fast forward to around April, and we were able to get access to the preview release of the agentic feature on GitHub Copilot. Mm-hmm. And being GitHub, being Copilot from GitHub, which probably is the most famous or the most used tool, at least in that moment, for this purpose, we also knew in that moment that all the learnings we had from the last 2-3 months were also applicable to Copilot because they work at pretty much the same. You have a prompt on your left side, and then in the right side you have the code, and you are prompting, and the code is it's changing. You approve your right. The experience is pretty much the same. Have different features here and there. So we started the experiment with Cursor because that was the option we had. And when we had access to the preview of Copilot, we wanted to switch to Copilot to also, get a different perspective, to validate the learnings in a different tool. Because at the end of the day, I coded Java in IntelliJ, Eclipse, NetBeans, I coded VS Code for JavaScript. It's not about the tool itself. It's about how you work on those tools.
Mm-hmm.
And what really matters on the AI thing is the model, which in our case was Cloud 3.5, Lane 3.7, Sonnet, something like that, in both tools. And given they were pretty much the same, we were able to apply the same workflows, the same learnings from Cursor on Copilot, and that's it. So basically, we use those two tools.
Nice. It's ridiculous how many different tools have just kind of come up and emerged. And once you realize that one can now 10x what it is that you wanted to do before, then you're kind of stuck in the mud and you have to keep on adapting and getting to learn to use those. On kind of using tools and just making applications work, I want to shift the conversation a little bit over towards how to implement this in a business sense, and how to build teams around these kind of learning points that you kind of came up with the experiment. But the issue that I want to try to solve that I find all the time is that we understand like how prompting is kind of able to give us a good trajectory and plan out how it is that we want to build out in app. What kind of advice would you give to a team that's looking to build out some of the topics that you've talked about today? Like how is it that teams should think about deploying AI tools based on what it is that you've learned? Are docs the answer, and is that the way to kind of go?
Luckily for us, now we have more documentation on how to use those tools that we had 11 months ago, and then we had 3 years ago, right? And probably in 6 months, we're going to have way more than now. So the first thing I would say is, especially leaders and companies, they need to identify within their budgets, their scopes, their schedules, everything that they have on their, their own work. They need to identify moments where they can allow people to experiment in a safe way, in a controlled environment, risking to fail, risking to waste time, which is not a waste in my opinion, because you are learning something new. So if I was asked 11 months ago by my leaders to provide a clear return of the investment of that particular experiment, probably the experiment wouldn't happen. I wouldn't be able to pitch a clear, this is the amount of money we can make by doing this experiment. That's luckily for me, that's how Modus operates in different places, right? We are very open to experiment, very open to learn. And that's something that I would say for the companies out there, that's the mindset I think people need to start, applying more. So leaders should be able to give their teams control environments where they can learn, they can experiment, because they can go to, to the content we have been producing as a company, or other companies as well. Go to Cloud Code, there are documentation there. GitHub Copilot, they have documentation there. They can learn it, but really, this is the type of learning that you need to put in practice. You need to get some time to work. So maybe not in your, flagship production project first, but maybe a small internal tool. Use these learnings, get a couple developers here and there, give them 3 months to work on an internal tool, only vibe coding at enterprise scale, by following the documentation we have available. And by doing that, they are going to learn and to overcome this first barrier that is more skepticism around, AI is not that good, right? As soon as that happens, people will learn more, will practice more, and will generate more content internally or externally, and they can spread that across the company, across the software engineering team.
I like that. Empowering people to kind of use these tools that we have available, because as you're kind of noting, and as we're seeing, it's a very different and changing landscape.
Yes.
The last thing I wanted to just touch on is that there's a certain like recklessness that's kind of associated with vibe coding, or just the term. And in order to convince your team to be like, hey, I'm gonna build this with AI, anyone uppers and looking down is going to be like, I don't know if I trust it. I don't know if we're going to want to be able to do that. How do you kind of fight and tackle those accusations? And how do you ensure that you are not only creating accurate code, but maybe is there like a quality assurance kind of process that you guys really are leaning into? But how do you kind of shake the thought that vibe coding is a little bit uneasily setting for people?
Yeah, I think a lot of about the vibe coding word is people on Twitter, trash talking it.
Uh-huh.
Those fancy people saying, "Hey, this vibe coder send me a localhost link for his application."
Yeah.
So what that teaches us is that people that are not software engineers are able now to write applications, and they are making mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not talking about that. When I'm talking about vibe coding at enterprise scale, I'm not talking about them. And I mean, that's completely fine if they want to learn, they want to do coding without uh, learning how to code. Uh, I don't have a strong opinion on that. What I'm talking about is how software engineers, professional, college graduated or, self-taught, but people that are software engineers um, are uh, writing code or generating code using AI and are being held accountable by the commits they are making to their GitHub repositories.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you think any enterprise company, they all have, before AI, without using AI, they all have pipelines with SonarQube or similar tools to verify the quality. They all have requirements of code review, peer code review. They all have unit tests. They all have those validation things in the process. If they don't have, that's another problem. It's not an AI problem. That's
Mm-hmm.
another problem.
Yeah.
So they should have those processes in place. So assume you have an application. Assume you have good developers, good software engineers, trained software engineers. Assuming that you have steps on your process that are going to validate the quality of the code that was written by a human being. Now, the only thing that is changing is that the human being, the smart human being that is a software engineer, is prompting instead of coding, and is reviewing, is reading, is looking to the code, and is
Mm-hmm.
passing that code through those validation steps. If you have that, you should not be worried about pushing that to production, right? Because you already have those validation steps. If your process has flaws, which is normal, can happen, that's not an AI problem. That's a flaw on the process, on Sonar, on the pipeline, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that should be fixed. It can be using AI to fix that now, but that should be fixed regardless you are using AI or not, because we human beings can make mistakes as well.
Yeah.
So when we put that mindset, at the end of the day, it's not that different. So that's why I started when I do my talk, I call Vibe Coding Enterprise Scale, because that's a catchy name. I want people to, hey, you're not talking about that, right? But at the end of the day, what I say is, for me, it's not Vibe Coding Enterprise Scale. It's how we
Yeah.
do agentic coding.
I like the way that you put that, especially between the people who are using the tools who have experience versus not. If you give a child a chainsaw, I'm sure they could do some pretty big damage too. Same as when you get a product manager who's vibe coding their way through, some false confidence, and it does leave some invited chaos for sure. But right people with the right tools, with a lot of power comes a lot of responsibility, something like that, right?
Exactly.
Well, is there anything else I've yet to ask you? Any other topics where we need to dig into?
People are asking a lot about the cost of running the experiment in terms of
Yeah.
money,
Oh,
like
yeah, yeah.
tokens and those kind of things, right?
Uh-huh.
That was one last question that I never thought before when the first person asked it. And it's a really important thing, right? How much money that costs.
Yeah, they get expensive.
In that project, I mean, the token cost is something you need to be very careful, right? But in that experiment, we had $180 of cost, at least talking about the tools, right? Not the salary of the human beings, right?
Yeah.
Talking about the tools, because essentially what we paid for was a couple of months of the monthly fee of Cursor and Copilot, especially Cursor, because Copilot was it's part of our internal partnership, so it's not something that costs us. So I don't remember exactly how much Cursor costs now monthly for a developer seat, but it's around $20, $25.
Yeah, I think
right?
it's 20. Yeah.
Yeah. So 3 developers, 2 developers coding. I had also a license, so 3 developers, 3 months, $20, around 80, 100, right? 180. So it was not that expensive.
No, it's a lot cheaper
And
than dev. Yeah.
yeah, yes. And we never reached the limit of tokens for the regular type of request that Cursor had.
Very neat. Yeah, I guess I was thinking about that. If you get a token count, let me know how many millions of billions of tokens. That would be sweet. To kind of see. You can see them running up like crazy. Well, Wesley, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate all the knowledge and the tidbits and information, and we're gonna start implementing those definitely within SignalWire as well. I know we're starting and we're riding along the same wave that you are. So I appreciate your insights today.
All right. Thank you, sir.
See you later.